So we'll start our evening with an introduction from OPDC CEO David Lunts.
Anita, thank you very much indeed. And it's great to see everybody here on the call this evening. I'm going to be extremely brief because this isn't a time really for me to go on. It's a time for others to speak, and particularly for local people to air their views and tell us what they want to see on the canal side as we go through the evening. It's amazing, isn't it, how we've all got so familiar with operating these meetings through Zoom calls and videos. What we're here to talk about tonight, of course, is the opportunities that the improvements along the canal at Ackenhausen can bring us when we finally get out of lockdown and we can start hopefully to enjoy the summer and autumn and the amenities that the canal offers. And I should just say that OPDC, the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation, is really pleased to have been able to help to put this event on this evening. We are the development corporation that the Mayor of London has created to bring forward plans, short-term plans and longer-term plans to improve the environment in our area of Old Oak and Park Royal, working with our three boroughs, Ealing, Brent and Hammersmith and Fulham, working with local people to do what we can to bring people into the heart of our regeneration plans and really listen to what people want to see in terms of improvements to their area. And also working with many others as well to bring investment into the area to improve things. So what we're doing in Ackenhausen is really part and parcel of that. It's not just about long-term change and what's going to happen once the new high-speed 2 station opens and all the rest of it. It's also very much about the here and now. And I'm looking forward very much to the conversation and the ideas this evening, because as someone who's long used the canal as a route to get to work, I know that there's a great deal more that can be done with it, a lot more amenity, and it's an incredibly precious asset for local people. So I'm very much looking forward to the contributions this evening. But for now, I'm going to leave it there and hand back to you, Anita.
Anita, you're on mute.
I've got to get my head around that as well. My apologies. Thank you for that, David. I'd like to introduce We Made That, the architect team that's on the project, Nisha, Kurian.
Hi everyone, my name is Nisha Kurian. I'm an associate at We Made That, and we are the architects working on this project. And so I'm going to take you through a bit of a project update, what we've looked at and who we've spoken to so far. So Ulrich, if you could. Great, so Ackenhausen Canal Site is one of the major projects in OPDC's In the Making initiative. Collaboration with local communities and enabling local people and businesses to kind of play a part in shaping the future of their area. That's what's at the heart of all of these, the projects to come out of this initiative. And so as you'll see here at Ackenhausen, the Sharks Canoeing Club is already an active component, and Ackenhausen Canal Site. So this project aims to be the kind of second that's delivered through this In the Making program. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the project and the team behind it. So the aim of the project is to create a flagship community hub for local residents, for businesses, boaters and visitors. And so we aim for these proposals for what's delivered to be shaped by the community. The project's being delivered by the OPDC, and it's in partnership with Brent Council and the Canal and River Trust. So we are part of a team that's been appointed by OPDC, and it's led by 3Space, who are a community and commercial space operator. Alongside ourselves, architects, We Made That, and a wider consultant team. The project is part of a £1.2 million community investment funded by the Mayor's Good Growth Fund. Next slide, please. And so where is it? The project area is on the south side of the Grand Union Canal at Ackenhausen. And it sits between the towpath between Acton Lane Bridge and Steel Road. So it's an area that already has a kind of cluster of activity, and that's one of the reasons why it's being considered for this project. It's next to a popular Lebanese restaurant. The Grand Junction Arms is just on the other side of the canal. And it's also on this key kind of location at this key crossing point on the canal between Harlesden to the north and Park Royal. There's also an active community groups and businesses nearby. And there's a number of kind of visitor moorings on this stretch of the canal as well. Next, please. What's the area like now? So some of these images kind of take you through the immediate vicinity and the wider area. So at the eastern end, closer to the Acton Lane road bridge, there's this existing kind of stepped public realm that connects Barrett's Green Road to the canal. The opposite side of the canal, as I mentioned, you have this pub garden for the Grand Junction. Slightly further away, you have some local landmarks, such as the McVitie's building on Waxlow Road. And there's also ramped access. So there's a big level difference from the street to the kind of canal towpath. So there's this ramped access from Barrett's Green Road. However, what you'll see is a lot of this public realm is actually the environment is quite poor quality. And then the bottom middle image is the view kind of from the towpath looking up at this Acton Road Bridge, which is very visible from this stretch. There's also a car park adjacent to the site, so that's used by local businesses and visitors to the Lebanese restaurant. So that's our kind of immediate context. Next, please. And we've done a bit of initial site research, and in this we've identified a number of kind of opportunities and constraints for the site. So starting at the Steel Road end, there's this opportunity to kind of build on what exists there, the existing kind of boater facilities, the bins located here, with additional facilities for boaters in the area, as well as improving this kind of connection as an entrance to the canal through things like better wayfinding and signage and public realm enhancement generally. This long kind of central green stretch between Steel Road and the bridge is actually very inactive at the moment. It suffers from issues with antisocial behavior. You see a lot of fly tipping, there's rough sleepers, and the adjacent buildings essentially kind of turn their back onto the canal here. But we see that there's potential for the space to accommodate activity. So things like boaters, DIY workshops, or other uses that can really enliven this space and potentially kind of encourage those businesses to open out onto it. So the bakery just adjacent to here, for example, we've been speaking to, who are interested in opening a kind of shop window serving onto the canal, and also just using that space maybe as amenity for the people that work there. And then finally at the Barrett's Green Road, Acton Lane, and there's this existing activity. So there's the container that the Sharks Canoeing Club operate from. There's also the Lebanese restaurant who have taken upon themselves to improve the landscaping immediately around their property. There's also this pub garden opposite, as I said. So there's opportunities to enhance that public realm even further and increase activity here. And also a potential for active uses on the water. So things like temporary moorings for cultural or social activity, as well as kind of landscaping improvement, especially around that kind of wedge-shaped site as it meets Acton Lane. Next slide, please. So what types of uses are we talking about here? We have made kind of one-to-one phone calls, a number of one-to-one phone calls, and had a number of conversations with local residents, boaters and businesses. And through this initial engagement, we've recorded a number of activities, and they sit within kind of 7 or maybe 8 categories. These range from more kind of production related making and mending uses, so things like makerspace or workshop facilities for boat repair, to boat related activities, things like the facilities I mentioned earlier, so showers, water access, waste, as well as kind of boat related classes or things like parts sharing and recycling resource for boaters. We also heard about education, training, and business uses, things like classrooms, meeting rooms, co-working space, learning halls. Food and growing was also a prominent topic that came up in the conversations. So things ranging from floating markets to food growing in allotments to more simply a kind of cafe with an outdoor seating area. A few people also mentioned demand for kind of multimedia recording studio type of space. And community space was also something that came out as quite popular. And that ranged from in a variety in scale from a kind of meeting room to a bigger community hall. Recreation and leisure, with the sharks, as I mentioned, already operating on the site, and other uses along the canal, such as learning and nature walks, things like running clubs, community festivals. So the facilities that can support such activity came up. And then finally, we heard a lot of important suggestions about improvement of the general public realm, the environment around the canal, through things like new planting, surfacing, introducing more seating or provision of bins and lighting to make the space feel safer and less neglected. Next slide, please. So this diagram tries to kind of translate the spatial needs from some of those previously mentioned uses. And while it's quite abstract, it communicates the kind of nature of some of the spaces that could form part of this new hub. And this is very early stages, but we're thinking about, what the implications are on the actual facility. And there are spaces that will need, a higher level of fit out. So things like offices or meeting rooms or cafes. But also at the kind of lower end of the spectrum, there's more low spec spaces for things like workshops, boat repair, kind of breakout space. There's also this spectrum that's about more kind of production related space where specific work happens to more consumption related space, such as kind of cafe or event space that's more public facing. Next, please. And so to better understand these uses, we've also been looking elsewhere at a number of precedents or examples where these kind of uses have been successfully delivered within communities. And some of the examples that we've put on here include things like the House of Materialization in Berlin, where there's this kind of focus on reuse and recycling materials with a workshop space provided. The second one is the co-mooring project, which took place just down the canal. It was a 4-week experiment to explore how the canal can be kind of transformed into an active space with events as well as public realm intervention. The third is de Kuvel in Amsterdam. So it's a sustainable community on a former ship wharf. Here they built new workspace and a cultural hub that have kind of transformed the space into a local destination. And then finally, this example of a kayak club in France, which is a kind of modest but efficient building. And it includes a sheltered public space, kayak storage, as well as kind of changing facilities to support that recreation and leisure use of the canal. So some examples. Next, please. And then finally, I wanted to talk a bit about the kind of time scales and also to begin to explain a bit about how this process relates to public engagement in particular. So the first stage is what we've done. We've undertaken numerous kind of one-to-one conversations to hear from you and kind of get a better understanding of the local area as well as its needs. And so now what we're in the process of doing is undertaking a kind of series of group workshops and discussions, because to be able to kind of collectively discuss these issues and the potential uses, because we feel it's always useful or it's always helpful to hear what your neighbors would like to see as well. And then the next stage, what we want to do is incorporate all of this feedback to form a brief for the project. So that will determine, what uses will be the most viable and suitable for the site, as well as guide the final designs of what actually gets delivered at Harlesden Canal site. Next, please. And so in the context of the kind of wider project timeframes, this is just the beginning. So we're at task A. Ignore the screaming baby in the background, sorry. We're at task A, which is about prototyping and scoping activity to support local communities and canal placemaking. So that's the process that we're in now, and it runs alongside task B, which is about scoping a business plan for the facilities to be delivered, and that runs until about April. And that leads on to task C, which is really the kind of design development and eventual delivery for the construction of the facility. And that will include the building, but also the kind of public realm. And that's envisaged to run from April to January next year. And then the final phase, which is task D, is where 3Space will operate this facility for approximately 5 years. And whilst doing that, building up capacity locally so that the operation can then be transferred to a local group or business organization at the end of that period, which is a very important part of this project. Next slide, please. Okay, so at this point, I just thought it was useful to remind everyone that if you haven't already done so, please register on the project website, and have a think as well about whether you'd like to be part of a kind of canals, what we're calling a canal sounding board, to help guide the kind of designs and decisions around this project. So I will add both of these links to the chat now. Next, please. Okay, so we've also set out a number of discussion topics to kind of inform the creation of the project brief, as I mentioned, as well as aid this business planning exercise. And as Anita mentioned, there are these kind of 3 groups, and we'd like you to choose one for the discussion later. I won't go through these questions quite yet, but what would be useful to do is, as you listen to the speakers, kind of have a think about which of these topics you would like to explore further in the discussion section. So I think at this point, I'll hand you back to Anita. How am I doing on time?
You are doing well. Thank you very much, Nisha. That was great. Any questions that you have that have come from what Nisha has said, please do pop them in the chat if you don't think you can hold on to them till the question and answers. Now it's all about community, and who better than to speak next about community, the MP, our MP for Brent Central, Dawn Butler.
Thank you very much, Anita, and thank you for putting on today's informative session. I mean, the community in Brent is absolutely phenomenal. We have the most diverse community in the whole of Europe. We have people from every corners of the earth in Brent. And the thing is, we live side by side, and in the main, we are a happy community. And I love the idea of us using this space for everybody, so that everybody can enjoy the canal, enjoy clean air. I love the idea of a floating market. So I think all of that stuff means that we can bring communities together. And we need to do that more, especially post lockdown, when everyone's going to be hopefully walking places, happy to be out. So thank you for getting the community together. Thank you for getting everybody together on this issue, on this community campaign, and let's work to make it happen, and a space for all communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Dawn. So as with all community initiatives and ideas and things that support us, we do need to have, like, you know, the leaders of the community also available and supportive. So that's, we appreciate that a lot, Dawn. Thank you. Moving on to speaking about from one of our 3 themes. So we have 4 themes, and we've talked about the different ideas around those themes. And one of those things is around the actual building, the community space. But what we need to discuss are the 3 themes that break off, that feed into the ideas for the hub. Okay, so the next 3 people are going to speak on those themes, which and starting off is Jan Ackenhausen from the OPDC to talk to you about the environment and canal placemaking.
Thanks, Anita. My name is Jan Ackenhausen, and thanks, Anita. I think you're the first person to pronounce it correctly in a really long time. I'm Principal Urban Designer at the OPDC, and along with my colleagues, Kavita, who's also on the call today, we lead on this project from OPDC's end. I'm just going to take you through a bit of context to tell you sort of how we're trying to address sort of environmental and volunteering issues along the canal. And that story starts with the canal placemaking study, which we commissioned in 2018, and which took a look at the canal in our area, but also put that in context with the wider area. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see that sort of pink blob in the middle, that's the OPDC area. And all the sort of pink asterisks is around it. Those are major development sites. And this gives you a bit of an idea of how important the canals and the waterways in general in London are in relation to bigger development. So we were quite keen on understanding what the value of the canal could be in that big regeneration project that OPDC, or Old Oak and Park Royal, will be. Next slide, please. So you all probably know the Grand Union Canal. There's a couple of really interesting, beautiful green spaces adjacent to quite gloomy underpasses, under bridges, and funny sort of constructions along the canal. And then the first steps of that regeneration that delivers sort of new public realm along the canal. Some are more successful than others. And we're really keen on building on those lessons learned. So in the next slide, this was actually the sort of starting point for us. Next slide, please. This was the starting point for us, is actually looking at what happens elsewhere in London, and to really understand what those challenges are and the lessons learned from development along the canal elsewhere in London. So this was in Camden. We went on a site visit where our colleagues from Camden took us along different generations of canal site development, and that was a really interesting trip actually, to really understand where we are today in terms of canal site development and sort of placemaking in London. Next slide, please. But alongside that sort of lessons learned and making sure that we integrate all of these sort of key lessons and conclusions from our colleagues, we also wanted to hear from the community what they think about the canal. So we set up shop, or boat in this case, for 2 days in the area, and the people from the towpath could come in for tea and a biscuit and tell us about the canal and help us create this 12-meter long map of the canal of our area. So all of that material, next slide please. All of that material gave us these really simple 6 ambitions for the canal, which is around lively bridges and making sure that bridges can attract activities. It's about good canal routes, making sure that everybody who uses the canal has access to it, and that access is inclusive and accessible for everybody. It's about a boater's paradise, making sure that the many boaters who enjoy West London, and especially our location, can find the kind of facilities they need to be able to actually make that also a better place for everybody. It's about good industrial edges, because the industry is going to stay, and we think that it's really important that we make sure that we can get those businesses as excited about the canal as we are. It's about a continuous green thread, not a threat, that's a typo. And really thinking of the canal as this linear park. And if you add that up, if you add up all of the green spaces along the Grand Union Canal, you actually get to the size of sort of a medium to large sized London park. And then last but not least, is all about a thriving canal community. So all of this should really build towards making or helping local community to take ownership and stewardship over the canal. And that involves people living in the area, but also people working in the area, and people moving to the area in the near future. Next slide, please. So we divided all of these recommendations into 3 sections: leisure, movement, ecology, and then broke them down into really specific recommendations. So a lot of what you're going to see here, also in the next slides, will sound quite familiar, but it's really to sort of, the point of this was actually really to get that on paper and to make sure that we have a good reference of what it actually is that we can do, either as a borough, as a planning authority, as OPDC, but also as community groups, how we can contribute to this vision. Next slide, please. So in terms of leisure, we're really keen on clustering activity along bridges where people have access to the canal. And that goes along with improved public realm, and also, if possible, providing boater facilities. And that's actually what the Ackenhausen Canal Site project is. Let's say 80% of the Ackenhausen Canal Site project is about this, is about improving public realm, activating a space along the canal, and supporting the boater community. And alongside that, we also want to provide opportunities for community stewardship. So this is, I'm going to come back to this later on, but we're really keen on developing so that opportunities for local communities to help take care of the canal and really make the canal their own public space. And then again, there's this idea of rethinking the backs of businesses along the canal and really thinking of those backs of businesses as a second frontage or a second sort of entrance, which they can also really take ownership of. Next slide, please. When we think about movement, it's all about making sure that this is a public realm for everybody, everyone can access it, and that we recognize that sort of the power, the slower pace of the canal in terms of it's not all about speeding to work and speeding to school, but it can also be this place where you can actually experience a very different pace and a very different rhythm from that that you experience in the rest of Park Royal, which is usually a very busy and bustling place. Next slide, please. And finally, ecology is all about protecting that wild quality of the canal and make sure that we can form that uninterrupted green edge to the canal. And there are there for volunteering, but also for education and kind of discovering that urban ecology and that urban biodiversity that's kind of difficult to come by in the sort of the density of Brent and the wider surroundings. Next slide, please. So I'm aware I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to speed through this. We can skip this slide. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So this project, the Hausen Canal Side project, this is sort of one of the key projects with which we're trying to achieve some of those ambitions and ideas. So this is a £750,000 community hub funded by the Mayor of London, which will provide facilities for communities, for community boaters and local businesses, but also for the existing canoeing club. And we're going to work on improving the landscaping. It's already a really nice green space, but it's probably very unknown for many people. Next slide, please. Another project we're currently delivering on site is slightly further east along Old Oak Lane, where we've got £250,000, again from the Mayor of London, to rebuild a pedestrian cycling access, which is currently quite muddy and gloomy. And we're looking at making that an accessible ramp, DDA compliant, and improving landscaping with edible planting and more sort of fun elements to make it more than just a simple ramp, but actually a kind of quite a pleasant dwell space as well. Next slide, please. So the Canal Volunteer Program is a program we're currently developing with the Canal and River Trust. So Emma, who's also on this meeting, she can tell you a bit more about it if you like. So this is a £50,000 program, which is led by the Canal and River Trust and funded by the OPDC and the Mayor of London. It aims to develop a one-year program with very specific activities to start building up that kind of sense of community, create opportunities to help caring for the canal, but also kind of upskill people in terms of how do you take care of sort of, let's say, green spaces along the canal. And in parallel, we'll be delivering planting improvements as part of this program, which will be delivered through volunteering projects with local businesses and employees. And all of this, well, not all of this, but the first bits of this will be launched in May, if all goes well. Next slide, please. I think this is the final slide. This is the water quality program. So we're aware that there's obviously there are, if we want people to come down to the canal and use the canal as a good public space, we need to also work on those environmental issues. And one of these issues is the water quality. There are a number of areas along the canal where we can make or we have to make major improvements. So we launched a study which is currently led by Thames 21 that will give us a couple of ideas of how to use nature-based solutions to mitigate some of the pollution that comes into the canal through the Brent feeder canal, but also in an existing swale alongside the canal, which is, some of you might know, it's a very smelly and disgusting little body of water. And the outcome of this will be sort of a list of projects that can then be developed through partnerships that we're trying to set up with other local authorities, with the Canal and River Trust, but also with community groups to help us bring forward these improvements. Next slide, please. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jan. So that was quite an in-depth discussion around the environment, all the different things that are happening within and around the canal actual body itself. So moving on now to our speaker from Newman Catholic College. Sorry, we've got that spelt wrong. I apologize, head teacher. We will do our spellings again correctly next. So Danny Coyle, head teacher of Newman Catholic College, will speak to us about youth and legacy. Good evening, Danny.
Thank you for that. I'm glad that spelling mistake wasn't my mistake. That's a relief to start off with. Listen, this is a very personal perspective here. You know, I'm going to talk about the wider context of the transformation of the West London area, in addition to the role that the Harlesden Canalside Hub can potentially play. And to start off by saying, really, this is just a fantastic opportunity. I defy anybody who knows about this not to be absolutely bowled over with excitement by what it can do for the people of this area. And that's the broader picture, you know, from HS2 to the OPDC projects, as well as, of course, the local hub that we're going to be talking about in a bit more detail. We're talking about social transformation here in terms of jobs and housing and era-defining changes for this part of West London. And when I think about the young people that I work with in Harlesden, I want to start off by saying it's critical that we recognise that affordable housing, that engaging, well-rewarding jobs have to be at the forefront of all our thinking. These things are great, but without those aspects integrated into the programme, I think they will struggle. And in my view, a potential Harlesden hub can play a role in achieving these objectives, as well as enhancing the quality of life for our young people, and also going some way to rebalancing the losses of the last couple of years. And I think timing here is critical. You know, we've had some difficult times through austerity and COVID, obviously, recently, and now this comes along with the potentiality to make things better for all of us. And I would say before I move on, that in my experience, we have to listen to everybody, the community, the experts, employees, the young, and we play to our strengths. It was mentioned earlier, Brent is the most diverse borough in the UK and Europe. And we've come to realise in Newman, in Harlesden, that diversity is actually a key. The presentation of solutions to complex problems can bring a fundamental advantage to our area. In other words, we don't realise how good we can be if we get this right, and we harness the riches and benefits that diversity can bring. And I think we have to recognise that the hub and this whole project is based on that foundation, that the diversity brings strengths and advantages that other people simply do not have. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of realism here. And again, I can't talk with any great authority on the impact of the pandemic, but I can talk about what it's been like as a head teacher. I've taught in London since the late 1980s, and I've been head at Newman in Harlesden since 2010. And what I want to say is this, when we're talking about the impact of the pandemic, is I think it's fair to say that those people who were suffering before March 2020, I believe are suffering more now. And those experience ill health, be it mental or physical, poverty, poor housing, all those predicaments have exacerbated. We know that the pain of this nation has not been universally shared, and that inequality has increased. And this has been added to, of course, by austerity and COVID. And the early data from educational institutions across the country seem to support the view that children have lost 3 or 4 months education, but the disadvantaged have lost an awful lot more. So when I say too soon to tell about the impact of the pandemic, I don't want to be facile or glib, because the vast majority of the students who came back to Newman, both September and March, came back full of joy and exuberance. In fact, the overriding characteristic of last week was laughter. You know, that genuine human need to interact with each other. It'd been revitalized again. And we need to remember that school is more than just examination results, as important as they are. It's an area where young people can develop socially and learn about themselves in relation to others. But the message here, and when I talk about being too soon to sell, is this. We believe that the impact of the pandemic will manifest itself in ways in years to come that we cannot yet conceive of. And they'll be profound and deep, in addition to inequality. So it's for this reason that school leaders across the country are saying that the catch-up funding has to be more than just 1 year, just a 1-year pay. It has to be a long-term, sustained, thoughtful investment in the well-being of our children. New slide, please. So how can a canal-side hub potentially go some way to alleviating the losses of recent years? Well, I'm not an expert in this. These are the views here of a middle-aged head teacher from the north of England who's worked in this city for many, many years. and other people could no doubt do better. But the activities here that I've articulated are popular in Harlesden schools and go down well in our after-school activities as well as in our holiday camps. And I thought them worth sharing. Remember, the evisceration, again, of youth services and local activities for children in the last 10 or 11 years. And we need to recognise that young people's value has to be appreciated, because the investment in their futures, of course, the investment in all our futures. Last slide, please. And finally, let me say this. We say this at Newman all the time, and it reflects the beauty and the power of the young people of Harlesden, but also some of the challenges that we face in this part of London. And that is, talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. And we encapsulate once more some of those hurdles and obstacles that prevent us from living a full life and achieving our potential. Therefore, we need to try and do what we can within our small corner of the world to overcome and defeat some of these battles, some of these challenges. And I think this is where the whole HS2 and Crossrail project and OPDC and the Harlesden Hub, where it all comes into play. Now, fortunately, already at Newman, we're working with the consortium around HS2, like many schools in West London, and they're delivering curriculum work and shared ideas and a bit of financial support and hopefully apprenticeships and jobs when we get in, when we get going again. So I do think there's an opportunity here where we can really begin to see the rubber hitting the road in terms of what I spoke about at the start of my presentation, i.e. jobs, training, skills, and engaging lifetime opportunities. You know, the OPDC talk about Birmingham being 38 minutes away from Old Oak Common, 250,000 people going through this Old Oak station every single day. It's massive opportunity, but there's more to it than this. I'll go back again. What is our core strength in Brent? What is our USP? It's our diversity. I hope some of you might have come across Matthew Said's book, Rebel Minds. You know, he talks about the key to diversity offers the different perspectives and insights and experiences and thinking styles. And it's through that harnessing of cognitive diversity that he argues that we can achieve a competitive advantage. And this is sitting on our doorstep. As Dawn said, it surrounds us cheek by jowl every day. And it's a good thing because potentially it makes us better. We can see problems with fresh eyes. New ideas and technologies can emerge from what Said calls a complex dance between individuals and the networks they inhabit. He calls it the collective brain. So we have on our doorstep not just a gateway to Birmingham and the north of England and physically the world. We have on our doorstep more than that. Because of our diversity, we have the harness of local talent. We have a collective global brain that surrounds us, that is therefore enabled to key into the world around us. And I'll finish off with this, agency. Over the years, you know, we've all been involved in many things like this. And I think it's really important that the local community have agency over this. You know, our mistakes will be our mistakes and our successes will be our successes, both for now and in the years to come. So that was a little over 6 minutes, Anita. Forgive me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coyle. I'll be taking 1 minute back from you when I come to visit you at the school. Thank you very much. Moving on now to our last speaker of the evening, Ryan Fuke, Brent Outreach and Prevention Manager at St Mungo's. Good evening,
Hi.
Ryan.
Good evening. Hi, everyone. Like I said, I'm from St Mungo's. For anyone who doesn't know who we are, we're one of the UK's leading homelessness charities. We believe that people can and do recover from the issues that cause homelessness. In Brent specifically, the outreach team supported 320 rough sleepers in the year from for last year. And as of yesterday, the team have a caseload of 11 known rough sleepers in the borough. I've totally changed what I was going to talk about today. Because as I was listening to everyone else, the talk that I was going to give isn't relevant, I don't think. I want to focus more on what the community can do to support rough sleeping and what we're already doing within the borough, because I don't think you need to reinvent the wheel with this. For example, we do a lot of joint work, not only with the council, with statutory services, but with the communities in the borough. So, for example, the Multi-Faith Forum in Brent is a huge ally to the rough sleepers, both formally and informally. So for anyone who doesn't know, the Multi-Faith Forum is a collective of all different cultural groups within the borough. They all come together as one forum to help with things like with homelessness. So, for example, they run the Sanctuary Shelter normally, which didn't take place this year because of COVID, but last year they helped 36 rough sleepers off the street in conjunction with us. They run soup kitchens, soup runs, all of that sort of stuff that they run from their pre-existing buildings. There are some places that have lost their buildings, have lost their spaces that would be key to get in. Maybe in conjunction with this project, it sounds like there's a real opportunity here to reach out to people who are excluded and use that space for something that could be really positive for them. Something that already happens with the community along the canal is that they refer rough sleepers. We've had a number of people who are in canal boats who have reported rough sleepers to StreetLink. So if anyone doesn't know what StreetLink is, it's an app, it's a website that people can refer rough sleepers to, and outreach workers will come out to the person at the side of the canal in Harlesden, and we give advice, we try and get them into somewhere, and that is something that could be promoted more through this community space. It could be something that outreach workers could access, and also just simple things for people who are excluded from society, such as rough sleepers. It's access to showers, is access to bathrooms that are really they're in need of. How can we make a community hub that feels inclusive and accessible to all? I can only talk about our clients of what we see as them being excluded the most. Our clients aren't able to use certain spaces, to them wrongly being associated with antisocial behaviour. I noticed, and this is a common mistake, I noticed that they were included in discussions around street drinking and antisocial behaviour in the talk earlier. This can become a vicious cycle with self-esteem and lack of belief in services, because not all rough sleepers do have alcohol problems or drug addictions or things like that. So that can really bring people down and stop people using spaces. Talking of spaces, private versus public space, and how private space is managed, if we are using security, how, if we're moving people on, how is that communicated to them? Is it through support and advice, or through intervention and getting statutory services involved? And it's probably a bit of the two. Lack of mental health accessibility or understanding can restrict people from accessing spaces. Learning difficulties, English not being their first language, digital inclusion, either through not knowing how to use technology or not having access to technology, lack of proof of ID or proof of address, and also travel to and from places where people can access services. That was all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Ryan. I think it's really important for everybody as a community to be part of that discussion and understand how we can support everybody that's using the canal side. And I think you're right in regards to having the signposting and helping those that are rough sleeping along the canal to understand what's happening and the changes and how we can effectively, as a community, support that. Thank you. Well, we've had some great talks from our speakers thus far, and now it's time for the breakout rooms. We do want to make sure that you get your chance to have your say. So there are 3 groups: environment, youth and legacy, and supporting underrepresented communities. The discussions around environment are: how can we encourage people to use and enjoy the canal more? How can we enhance our outdoor space? What has been your experience of Harlesden during the pandemic, and what would you like to see more of to improve that experience? If you're interested in the environment, you would join group 1A or group 1B. Group 2 is youth and legacy. How do we celebrate what makes the area so unique? How can we enable healthier lifestyles and outdoor activity? How can new uses support building skills and employability? And how can the hub support young people? If you're interested in that topic, please go to Group 2A or B. And then Group 3, supporting our underrepresented communities. How can we support existing community activities at the new hub? How can new community activities be facilitated? How can local businesses be supported to create opportunities in the community? How can we make a new community hub that feels inclusive and accessible to all? And how can this add social value that benefits the wider community, that's inclusive of everybody in the community? And that's Group 3A or 3B. Well, can I just say, I eavesdropped on every session, I believe, and there were the most amazing conversations being had, exactly why it was so important to have this webinar. Does everybody, if you can nod, put your thumbs up if you felt that, you know, there were some good conversations? Great. It's really important that we were able to have that. So if we can start feeding back, because I'm aware that time's running down, and I want to be able to have the questions and answers before we finish. So if we can start with Group A1, can you feed back as to some of the thoughts, the key points that were discussed in your group?
Yeah, sure. I think that's over to me. Thanks, Anita. Yeah, there's an overall feeling that the canal is currently pretty well used. You know, there's been a lot of usage during the pandemic. There's a growing number of cyclists as well, and of course that with that comes the growing conflict, because there are so many different users wanting to use the space for different things. We did then talk about how can we make the space interesting, and you know, we know there's a lot of activity already with litter pickers and community engagement like that, but things like access to access is make, sorry, I can't remember what I said. There's lots of different users who've got different requirements. I think that's something that's key in our meeting. And it ended with an interesting discussion about food growing and how, even though it'd be a fantastic thing to do, if it's something we want to do and if it's something we think groups can do, security is a major part of that. How can the food be grown in an area that will be well looked after?
Wonderful. Wow. And yes, I was at the tail end of that discussion and doing lots of nodding and thumbs up to what Philip was feeding back on. So yes, interesting. Group 2A, Youth and Legacy.
Hi, thanks, Anita. So some of the key points we spoke about in our breakout room was about how to access and communicate things to young people and where the best routes might be, whether it's sort of social media or that kind of thing, but thinking carefully about how we communicate with young people. Well, one of those was also very much trying to go through schools, so it was great to hear from Danny earlier. We also had Fola, who runs Abundance Arts in the area, Monica on the call, who run, Maria on the call, who run different arts and creative activities already in the area, and work with lots of young people already. So it's really interesting to sort of hear how successful their programs are. And then the last thing we sort of started talking about was about how to create ownership, but how to allow young people to have some ownership over the area. That was a comment from various of the councillors, and also Neil, who runs the Sharks Canoe Club, and yeah, making sure that the young people really have a sense of ownership over their spaces, and that will encourage them and help them sort of make the best use out of the space. I think those were the main points. If anyone else wants to jump in, feel free.
Great. So Group 3A, underrepresented communities.
Thanks, Nita. I'll be quite quick, but we had a good discussion, and particularly kind of off the back of Ryan's points made earlier, but thinking more broadly about access and safety when it comes to supporting our underrepresented communities, thinking about how we make shared space within the scheme, and how do we make good neutral space, and what would it be to attract lots of different users to a space, and how do you kind of complement that and create dynamic activity, but at the same time make safe spaces. And we talked a bit about safe spaces to play, safe spaces to eat, things that everyone does. And so we can have some universality with bringing people together in a space, but not forgetting that there are also some particular challenges around sheer accessibility of the space. And I think that those points have been made by the groups too, about how do we make sure that people feel safe, that there's not contested space either on the towpath between uses, but also levels and other things within that space that also might be a turn off to certain groups or certain users. Did anyone want to add anything to those points? No, then back to you, Anita. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yes, such great conversation. I'm excited. Okay, calm down, Anita. Right, so can I have group 1B, environment B group?
Kerry, are you there still?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Did you want me to feedback? Or do you have?
I can do a very quick run through. Yeah, should I do
Yeah,
that? So we talked about maintenance to do with the canal, how that's just going to be a really key thing moving forward, particularly with new people moving to the area. We also talked about how COVID was an interesting kind of shift, because in a way the canal's kind of being overused potentially. Some of the people we were talking to in our group said that now there's a bit of a conflict, as Oliver was mentioning, there's so many people trying to use the canal that's kind of a good and a bad thing at the same time. And we also talked about how the canal has changed over time, so that now the fact that there's more people moored up has actually kind of brought that sense of kind of passive surveillance to the canal as well, because, you know, there's more people using the canal moored up, that actually a sort of sense of safety has improved a bit over time. So I think that's some of the key issues I've just quickly run through. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Kerry?
No, nothing else from me.
Great, thanks, Anita.
Wonderful, great. So youth and legacy B, group B.
Yeah, I can feedback quickly. So we were fortunate to have Danny in our group after his presentation earlier. So we kind of built on those themes and talked about the big strength of Harlesden being in its diversity, and how that can really be kind of represented and celebrated within this project. Someone in our group made a really good point that most people who are really going to benefit from OPDC's future work are probably still at school at the moment. So in that sense, engaging with young people is incredibly important in this project and other work that OPDC is doing. So yeah, we were talking about ways to get young people involved, and a sort of key action that came out of our group was looking at some ways to actually get some young people together in maybe some focus groups or conversations. You may have done this already, but we had some offers in our group to help connect with some of the young people at Newman School in particular, which could be really helpful. So hopefully those can be picked up after this meeting.
Yep, great.
That Rick's made a great comment about we've got representation from the whole world sitting in one borough. So how do we kind of utilise that and build on that knowledge?
Excellent, some exciting stuff. Yes, looking to the future. Group B, underrepresented community.
Yeah, so I'll just run through really quickly, because conscious of time. We talked about kind of what could happen on the space, what people wanted to see, the need for kind of meeting rooms, building on the kind of making and crafts. We had somebody who was looked after or kind of supported people with mental health issues, and she said that kind of carpentry, food and growing, somewhere where people could do things, make things with their hands would be really, really welcome. Yeah, meeting spaces, but we did talk about making sure that the space was accessible and making sure that through the right governance, it was accessible to all, so that it wasn't just kind of monopolized by one group, and so that there could be a mixture of everybody and different people using the space was really important. And that it was kind of felt as though there should be, you know, there shouldn't just be kind of people volunteering from the community, but people who had some experience in doing that. And if that was, you know, them doing something where they were upskilling people at the same time, or operating business at the same time, that's fine. And I think the other things were just talking about how it would all work in practice and making sure that that mixture of uses. So it was Isabel from the boating community said, you know, it'd be really, really welcome to have a boating workshop. They really need a boating workshop, but in practice, how would that physically sit with some of the other uses that were mentioned, and to kind of give some thought around that. I don't know if anybody else from our group wants to add anything further.
Yes, one of the words that I really like that came out of our session was legacy. So it's just building on the legacy. You know, what can we do after? Is it going to be sustainable? So it's, I just feel that we just have to have something that we can always look back on, you know, in years to come and say, look, we had part in building this and it's still here. So legacy.
Excellent. Oh my gosh. Nisha, you look just as excited as I do. So, as I feel, should I say. Really, really amazing. Thank you to everybody that contributed in the groups. And we will now open the floor for questions and answers. And please, if you have a specific question towards a specific area of topic, please do kind of say that at the beginning of your question so that we know who would be the correct person to answer. So if it's to do with the building design, if it's to do with the environment, the river, we've got various people in the room that can answer those questions. So.
And feel free to type in the chat. If you
yes, please, yes. So if you want to type questions in the chat, please do that now. And if there are any questions that came up earlier, Clarissa, you noticed any questions that came up earlier? Or does everybody feel that they had the opportunity to speak and have their questions answered?
They've all answered, sorry, in the chat. And any that haven't been able to be answered, it's been taken away and noted as well.
Okay. Wow.
Anita, sorry, can I just flag? There's one question that came up which maybe just worth putting to put that to the group. Yep. It was asked, what happens at the end of that 5 years? So in Nisha's presentation, she talked about 3Space being the operator for 5 years, but then what happens and what does success look like? So maybe
I can answer that.
Thank you.
No, that's a really good question. So we're really keen on working with local community and Brent Council throughout those 5 years to set up or find a local community group or local community interest company that can actually take on the management and operations of that community hub after those 5 years. And the idea really is to have to make sure that the space can actually evolve with alongside the needs of local community, and that it remains relevant to the local community as time goes by. That's sort of a really general comment. I can go more into details, but we really want to take those 5 years to actually figure out what's the best model to hand over the facilities to a local community group. So we don't have all the answers as of yet.
Great, thank you, Jan. I believe Councillor Ernest would like to say something. If you unmute yourself. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Just a thought. I know we've talked about environment, we've talked about canal and the feeder and all these things. So my direct question, there are some communities or wards that are at the border of OPDC map, and the impact of the development will be highly affected this community. No matter the actual benefit, they will be disadvantaged on the benefit of the development. So what's the thought of OPDC on how they will help those communities to benefit from that, the impact from the actual development they are doing. So it's a thought I think they will consider on this big picture we have been hearing about the development. Thank you.
Could I just, before we go on to answer that question, I do, we are out of time, but if everybody doesn't mind putting in an extra few minutes to do the questions and answers, is that okay with everybody?
We're happy to stay around,
obviously,
yes,
if you
Anita.
have to, yeah, if anybody has to go, obviously, you know, we won't be watching you leave the room, don't worry, but please do leave any messages that you'd like us to discuss in the chat, and email info@3space.org if you have to leave. Okay, sorry, go ahead. If we could answer that question, how would we support some of the more disadvantaged local communities that are on the borderline?
Sorry, I'll try to answer that question. I mean, that's obviously not a very easy question. I think in terms of this project, what we've really been trying to do is reach out reach out as wide as possible to the local community, and making sure that we don't only speak to the people that we usually speak to, which in general are interested by OPDC because of what it does or what it is not going to do. But we're really keen to actually have conversations with people who don't usually speak to us, who we don't usually speak to. And I think that's one of the key reasons why also Anita was brought in as a sort of locally anchored person to help us with this. So I think from those conversations, we're actually trying, or in those conversations, we're trying to find out how we can make this project as relevant as possible for the wider community. I think obviously we can't benefit everybody, but the ambition is to make sure that as many people as possible will actually find value in this project and find their interest and their voice represented in what gets delivered on site.
I can, and I hope that's okay, Councillor Ernest. We've met many times when you were mayor. So I think one of the key things again, and I have to say about in regards to the OPDC that, you know, if those that don't know me, I am like third generation Harlesden born and raised, went to Furness Primary School, and have been part of various different groups across the Harlesden locality. You know, used to hang out in Stonebridge Estate, you know, and various different communities that trying to access and using somebody like me that has had a long-standing commitment to being part of and supporting our local community, where I go into schools and I speak to young people in schools. I've worked with Newman Catholic College. I was a governor at QPCS. I've been on the parents board at Leopold School. So there are very many things that I do from a young people's point of view as well, and also, you know, my mum was the church warden at All Souls Church, you know, in Harlesden. So there's, you know, I know lots of people in the community, and I am doing my best to get out there and speak to different people, and also speaking to housing associations and Brent Council in support of, you know, literally getting to speak to various people from different groups within the area. And that's why something like this was so important. And so I'm very pleased that so many people were able to come from different pockets of the community to represent and have these conversations. But now, you know, the next step for all of you in the room now is to also go out and speak about what's happening and get people's opinions and bring them forward, and share this video that's going to be available to all, to have those conversations moving forward so that they can still have their say. So councillors, I put it to you that when you're doing your surgeries, if you could please mention the different things that are going on. You meet different people when you're doing your surgeries that have interest in what's going on. They might have some skills. So if you could put that to them and say, look, this is going on and there is support here from the OPDC and from 3Space, and we made that, and Brent Council and CRT, all these people are willing to help support all the growth in the local area, and we're all interested in ensuring that local people are involved. We don't want a white elephant. I definitely, those of you that know me, I'm a big mouth. I've complained, I've talked, and I've made friends in the area, and I definitely don't want this to be something that isn't going to be used. So it's important that we all passionately get involved to create that change for our area that we live in and work and grow in. So yes, that was my speech for the day. I apologize. Is there any other questions anybody wants to put forward? Has anything come up in the chat, Clarissa, that we need to discuss? Well then, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I've said it already, it's so important to have people from the community, people that are going to be using the space, involved in any planning and executing any of the projects that that are happening in the area. So I really truly appreciate to see so many familiar faces, new faces, and I hope that as soon as lockdown finishes, that we're able to have some more events that we can see each other face to face, even if they are socially distanced. And I appreciate you all coming. If there's anything else, Nisha, that I've missed out?
I don't believe so. Emily is just dropping a number of links about how to kind of stay in touch, register your interest in the project just at the end.
Please do look in the chat now, copy and paste those. Those of you that have emailed me already, if there's anything else you'd like to know, please drop me an email, anita@3space.org, or to info@3space.org, and we can continue that conversation and continue to support the growth of this particular project. Thank you very much for coming. Go and have a cup of tea, a biscuit, something to eat. I hope you all have a great evening. Thank you so much for coming, and I look forward to speaking to you all individually in the future. Thank you.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
Anita. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Anita.
Thank you, Anita.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Good night.
Everyone.
Later.